Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for USports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics. For today, we are earning that moniker of your home for USports football as we take you around the league doing conference previews for the AUS, RSEQ, and the CANWEST in order. As we've talked about over the years, our dreams to get that C2C coverage on a regular basis. But this is what we're bringing your way here. And we're going to talk about all those conferences, the great players that make up the teams within them, and so much more. But first, Tom, how the heck are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing so well, my man. It's so exciting to be able to talk about the rest of U Sports football as well, and my experiences getting out, admittedly seeing practices for both University of Alberta and Calgary, but then also doing some work earlier before the season started with Mount Allison and getting a chance to be out east as well. I'm so excited to be able to talk about all of U Sports in this one.
It's going to be an excellent podcast because we're going to not only get to look at the teams in the conferences, but also start to think about, okay, whoever it is making it out of Ontario, like what's waiting in store for them. And as a reminder, the Wednesday slot of podcasts are where we're reserving for just the miscellaneous things that may come here and there. We'll do a midseason check-in with the out of OUA conferences in U Sports, as well as an end of year check-in at the end of the season. So with no further ado, let's jump right into the action. Let's start out in the AUS. As a reminder of last year, Bishops ended up running the table through the playoffs, through the regular season, and into a Lonely Bowl championship, going 8-0 throughout the season. And Tom, when you look at the roster and with some of the teams, much like it was doing our tiers going through the OUA teams, some teams have, now being, like days away from the start of the seasons, respectively. A lot of them have the updated rosters, some don't. But when you look at this Bishops team and you just think about, the returning the MVP and Justin Quirion, running the ball with O'Shea Hosang, the possibility, though it was uncertain because of him being a grad student, of possible Marco Briones being back in there, and a whole host of guys that made that offense. And we'll talk about the defense as well, because the defense was, put up some crazy numbers last year, but that offense alone, which was able to run the table in the Atlantic Conference. When you look at those names, just on the offensive side of the ball, returning MVP in Quirion, who was actually, though I think we understood, really wasn't on the same level where obviously, Elgersma was and Desjardins last year. But when you look at that talent offensively coming back with this Bishops team that was able to get it all done last year, just starting there, like that must still be the team to beat when we think about AUS football.
Yeah, I think it has to be. I mean, even when you look at last year's stats between Quirion, he finished with 169 completions, 65% completion percentage, 2,307 yards passing, 18 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. That's just 2 touchdowns short of where Elgersma finished last year. So this was a highly explosive offense, and talk about a team that went through a lot of adversity and came out on the other side of it. I mean, obviously, you and I remember what happened with the overtime thriller that happened in the Lonely Bowl, but the very first game of the season, they go up against St. FX, and they go to double overtime. Like, this is a team that's experienced and really came through on the other side. St. FX with Silas Fagnon and these guys, they, in my mind, were still the team to beat. And to go at them and do it 3 times and to get through that, it was just really outstanding and a testament to how good that team was.
And that's a great point you bring up, in that like it wasn't a rose colored pathway of whatever, like that they had to earn that 8-0 title, and they had to earn that Lonely Bowl going against the team in St. FX, as you talked about, which has had really owned that conference so far with Silas Fagnon at the helm. And it really wasn't until 20 minutes ago talking to you and realizing that despite what I actually thought, Fagnon is back for them. I don't know about Ben Harrington, his kind of go-to target. We've seen them, obviously, the Malcolm Bussey days of him, winning AUS MVP and then going to a guy in Caleb Fogarty being the leading rusher in AUS football. So they've always had good offenses there. And I guess we're kind of talking about St. FX a little bit now as well. But just to that point, and then against a St. Mary's defense, in specific, of all the things St. Mary's did impressively, a defense that led up 18.8 points a game. And of course, leading the AUS defensively was this Bishops team with 16 points a game giving up. But I think to your point, it's that 8-0 record, the Lonely Bowl, when you don't look careful enough, you can think that maybe, especially that, in recent years, we've seen the AUS be in a bit of a less than stellar place in terms of the top talent and the depth of talent. But I think right now, when you look at some of these teams, and especially knowing that Saint FX is bringing back their guy in Silas, it's very promising. But sticking with Bishops just for a second, because this defense, again, gave up 16 points a game with, again, if to look no further than at least them having to take on a St. Mary's team with one of the top quarterbacks in all of Ontario with Silas Vagnon. But when I look at this defense for St. Mary's, pardon me, for Bishops, I think about, and again, not names that I'm as familiar with, but just kind of going through the roster and looking at names like Alex McDonald at defensive back, who was an AUS All-Star, or Brandon James Poulin. I can't even read my writing. My apologies. He got the double barrel first and last name, but on that D line, and a few other guys that were in the top sack leaders, all AUS, but are all fourth going into fifth year guys, which either means that this defense is about to somehow run it back with the tools that made them that much special, a year more veteran, but you also risk the possibility of, is one of those guys not coming back? Are they, is there going to be that weakness? And especially on the front line with those linebackers and defensive line they had that were causing nightmares for quarterbacks. From what you're seeing with this defense, as stellar as it was, do you see more of the possibility that they're closer to that 16 point per game average? I mean, it would be to be able to surpass that and go underneath is I don't think it's fair to hold them to that standard. Or do you think we see a little bit of a dip here with this defense, and the 24 season was maybe, not to say an outlier, but the upper end of what they can do?
I think that this defense has the capability to run it back. I really do, especially with the guys who have the potential to come back into this one. The big thing for me is that when you watch this, the only teams that were really able to score on them or even just move the ball was Saint FX. And in that first round, that was really where we saw it. My apologies. I initially said it was the first time. It was the last time that Saint FX and Bishop played that they went to that double overtime. In the first game, Silas Vagnon goes 12 for 28, 227 yards, one touchdown, no interceptions, and really weren't able to get a whole lot done offensively here because this defense was just incredible. I mean, total offense was 284 for Saint FX versus 604 for Bishops. To have that capability on the back end, as well as Justin Curion and the rest of that offense to really get things going there. It's not, when you look at those numbers and specifics, the points against, yes, obviously that's for the defense, but a big chunk of that as well is how well that offense can then hold the ball and potentially move with it. Because if you get a couple of consistent two and out, or even maybe a smaller drive, but for the most part get them out, that opposing defense is going to be real tired. And when you've got a guy like Hirion that can not only hurt you in the air, but also with his legs, this is a recipe for disaster for a lot of teams.
And yeah, the talent there, I think, however you split it up, is going to, I think, from what we're seeing on the rosters, what we saw last year, fair to say that that's still probably a safe bet, just that those with Saint FX and that Bishops being kind of the crown jewel there. And of course, as we talked about a little bit, that Loney Bowl game with what St. Mary's was able to do, bringing Bishops to the brink is interesting. And because on paper, you look at this team and you think, man, you try and make the comparison. I mean, that defense for St. Mary's, just looking at the names across the board of whether it was AUS All-Stars or just the guys in their linebacking and front seven in general who were just eating up running backs left, right, and center. That defense is clearly, I think, from the looks of it, going to be able to hold them in games as well. Offensively, as it were the case last year as well, where St. Mary's truly was that differentiating point where it's you have Bishops, you have St. FX, they're scoring points and their defense is good. You have St. Mary's, that defense is right there with those other two teams. The offense separates. And from where I sit right now, just looking at who's on paper, you have Alan Young, the first going to second year. We saw him in the mix with them on that, Loney Bowl run they had. And then Michael Petroshki going into what would be his fifth year. I don't know if you've seen anything. There's a couple AUS preseason games that have happened. If you've come across any sense of who might be winning that QB battle right now, because I think just as it stands, we know they have a defense that can keep them in games with these two teams. And yes, they were in that Loney Bowl last year, but just knowing that Silas is back and that knowing that Quirion and that defense are going to do their thing with Bishops, I'm trying to sort of see the angle of, without it being that same Miracle Run vibe to it, how St. Mary's can really maybe make a splash and get into that conversation again.
I think the big piece with St. Mary's is if they want to get it back into that conversation, it's the same thing that they did last year and having outstanding defense. I mean, you look at Bishop's only giving up 16 points per game, and that's nuts, but St. Mary's is at 18.8, right behind them in nearly every category here, only giving up 236 yards in the air. This is a team that really does a good job limiting things and even leading the conference last year in 13 interceptions. So having a team that can get after the quarterback and then pick them off when they make a bad decision to set up guys like Allen Young and the rest of that offense to really do their thing. I think if St. Mary's wants to get back into that Loney Bowl, that's really where that has to come into play. That defense has got to step up for a younger, obviously a year older now, but a young offense that still needs a little bit of time to gel.
Now, without trying to go too deep into, a conference that, we're building our familiarity with, let's maybe like lean towards our closing thoughts sort of in twofold. One, you have an Acadia team and a Mount Allison team. Acadia's making the playoffs, losing to Bishops in the first round there, and Acadia just getting, pardon me, and Mount A just getting the one win on the season. The question I have for you with all our conferences is that when we look at just the playoffs of each conference, so the Loney Bowl playoffs 1 through 4. Do you see a shakeup in what we saw this year? I feel our 1 through 3 is probably going to stay put. But in terms of that bottom, is there an opportunity? And obviously, there's opportunities for Acadia to, ascend that much more. But because of your experience with seeing Scott Brady's Mount Allison program, what you're able to discern going back a couple months, what did you learn about that team? How Coach Brady is running things? Obviously, there's the great interview still up on our archives that folks go listen to if you didn't check it out. What is it you think Mount A is going to bring to the table this year that can have them competing with whether it's Acadia if they're still in that 4 slot or if other things shake up that is going to really stamp this as the Scott Brady era of Mount Allison football?
I think going into this season, especially with Coach Brady being there, it's a different mentality. And obviously, when he left Mount Allison a number of years ago, they were at their most successful ever. The first time, I believe, in program history where they went 8-0 in the regular season, made it off into the Loney Bowl champions in that 2014 year. I think that with him coming back, not only is that great for the program because he's coming back, he also brought back Coach Kelly, his old head coach, who's now going to be the offensive coordinator for Mount Allison. Like this is stacking up to be a really talented coaching staff for the Mounties. But it's the mindset and the mentality that Coach Brady is bringing into this. He has a very clear message of hardest working and most connected team. And this is a message that he's gotten not only to the players and the coaches, but to the alumni, getting people engaged, getting people excited again, and really turning things over with the recruiting side of things. He said one of the things in that interview that he learned the most when he was in the OUA, obviously seeing different schemes offensively, defensively, and just getting more experience. But the thing that he brought back to Mount Allison that I think is going to benefit them the most is recruiting. Learning how to properly recruit from arguably one of the best recruiters in the conference in Greg Knox, what his mentality is, what his schedule is like, what do you expect from your coaches, even the guys that aren't on the full payroll who still want to help out and give back. How do you really start to expand out the Mounties' reach, not just in the AUS, but across the country? I think that's going to bring another level to Mount Allison. Going into this, I would be shocked if Mount Allison is not in the playoffs this coming year. I think they get back into playoff contention. I also think that St. FX gets back into their winning ways. I think you're going to see a St. FX versus Bishops in the Loney Bowl here, and it's Silas Fagnon in his last year. Because let's not forget, they lost twice to Bishops in the regular season. They also got upset by Acadia. I think the final score was 27-22 type of thing. And this is a team that had previously won the Loney Bowl 2 or 3 times in a row. And that same kind of shock that I'm sure Western also experienced in the OUA, St. FX is going to come into this with a new level of hunger and a new willingness to say, you know what, we got knocked off last year, credit to Bishops, but we're still this team, and Silas is still one of the top quarterbacks in the conference, if not the country.
And all the credit in the world to Coach Waterman and just
Oh my
the
God, yes.
consistency he brings to that program year in, year out. I certainly am not gonna have any qualms with a Saint FX and a Bishops Loney Bowl with those two quarterbacks dueling it out. Tom, let's pause on the AUS conversation right there, unless there's anything else in terms of your experience from Mount A you want to get across.
No, I'm just really excited for Scott Brady to be back home in that setting and what he's going to do to that program. But the entirety of the AUS, let's see what Bishops can do, or if Saint FX or any other team is going to be chomping at their heels.
Brilliant. Well, then let's make our transition into the Belle Provence and look at the RSEQ as a reminder of last year beyond just being your Vanier Cup champions. Laval was atop the RSEQ with a 7-1 record, tied ostensibly with Montreal, but getting the nod via tiebreak. McGill came in third at 3-5, Concordia at 2-6, and Sherbrooke was at the bottom of the RSEQ in a 1-7 effort on the year. Tom, I think we need to. I'm torn if I want to start with, Laval because they are the incumbent champions, and as I think we're in agreement with, are the running favorite to go back to back, which is just incredible to say because we obviously love the top talent we have in the OUA, and we're gonna keep talking about some really good schools this year or in this podcast that we have across the country. But I think we need to talk about Montreal to begin with. The Carabin, the Vanier Cup champs from 2 years past, and for no other reason than Mr. Jonathan Senecal is now moving on to greener pastures. You have some insight into what that quarterback position, that battle's been looking at. And beyond just Senecal, again, just sort of set the table if you haven't really looked at this Montreal team. That defense of 2 years ago when they won the Vanier, that was in conversations of one of the greatest we'd ever seen in USports. It's obviously slowly been losing some of those key pieces. A lot of those key pieces played their last football for Montreal last year. They're not going to be back. And a couple of Senecal's weapons, like one in specific that I think really defined his tenure in Montreal, and Carl Chabot, I don't think is back either. But let's start with the former Heck Crichton and Vanier Cup champion in Jonathan Senecal and what that means to this program.
Yeah, I mean, when you lose a generational talent like that, that's always going to hurt a program. But in talking with a lot of, certainly the supporters of the Carabin football, there's almost a certain level of optimism that's here because while, yes, Senecal was the offense, he was incredible, and even getting a chance to speak to head coach, Coach Marco, about him as well. He's such a special player. One of the things that really got Montreal into a lot of trouble, not just last year, but the year prior while they were coming out to the Vanier, is that they didn't have the balanced offensive attack to really hold on to the ball in key scenarios here. With Jonathan Senecal, I mean, at times you're either moving the ball so far down the field so quickly and you're scoring a touchdown, you give the ball back to a team, or you like a standard offense, you go 2-and-out in a scenario, he gets put into a bad spot, so he makes a mistake, which didn't happen very often. But now there's two guys who are up for contention. Raheem Canal Charles, who I believe is going to have the best chance. He was the guy last year behind Senecal, or Jose Alejandro Gonzalez Garza, also known as Pepe, on the team. The two of them are the guys who are vying for that starting quarterback spot. But once again, after speaking with the Carabin faithful, they're very excited about this because they believe both guys have the talent in order to be here, but there's going to be a need to rely more heavily on that run game as well. And if you, once again, the playbook, the mold, let's say, to get out of the RSEQ, outstanding defense and being able to control the ball. If you have that, there's a very good chance you're going to get out of the RSEQ and be in that Vanier Cup conversation as they are year after year.
It's funny to think that in so many ways that confidence that you were expressing the Montreal faithful were kind of trying to get across to is like, Senecal, he was good, but he's just too explosive. We needed to grind out a couple first downs here and there and just slow down the gameplay a little bit. So it's kind of hilarious at the same time. But okay, control the ball, control time possession, run the ball if you can, and have that standout defense. So let me now read you some of the names that we're not seeing for the Carabin. Obviously, we know with Jeremiah Ojo, again, terrific career he had there. He's gone. Harold Missin, former President's Trophy winner, is gone out of the program as well. Christopher Fontenelle, the all Canadian D lineman they had, he's out of there. Nicky Farinaccio, one of their top tacklers in the linebacking core, also gone. As far as, or at least I'm pretty confident from what I was able to discern with the rosters. You still have a guy like Nicolas Roy and Elijah Cramé in the defensive secondary who top players in their own right, and part of that vestige, that lineage tying to that 2023 team. And we talk about this with our OUA teams all the time, the ones that are there at the top year in, year out. It's not just because of one generation of players, it's because they're able to fill in those gaps. And if there are any teams that you're going to, of all the teams you're going to extend that belief towards, Montreal is one of those teams across all of USports that you say, okay, yeah, I might not know who those guys that were, sitting and waiting in the wings behind them are, but I feel pretty good because of what this team does consistently. But when I think about those names of Fontenelle and Ojo and Missin, that front seven that was, obviously so remarkable for them those last few years definitely has taken a bit of a hit. I'm curious from your vantage point, whether or not in your conversations with the Montreal faithful, they had addressed that, because I don't see how to not even acknowledge, like, yes, that's, you hate to see them go, but like, we know that we have some people to fill in from the bench.
So the one thing that I will say off the hop, I'm fairly certain, like 90% certain, that Mr. Harold Missan is back for this squad this year.
Okay, that's cool. That's
Yeah,
sick.
I'm fairly certain that he is, because I remember having a conversation with head coach Coach Marco at East West, saying it was very surprising that he was not picked up by a CFL team, considering all of the incredible work that he has been doing with the Carabin and being on arguably the best defense that USports has ever seen just a couple of years ago. But this is a team that has really established themselves with that same defensive philosophy. Many of those guys from that 23 season are still back, or at least the essence of that team is still back on this team. And once again, you talk to Coach Constantine, you talk to Coach Idaluka, you talk to anybody in the RSEQ, and they will tell you the way you get out of the RSEQ is by playing defense. I know that this Montreal squad is going to have an incredible presence on defensively once again. It's just going to be, how well are you going to be able to stop a fifth-year Arnaud Desjardins and the rest of that offense?
Well, then, like, let's talk about him, because, like, really, this came up in conversation last year as we were watching. Frankly, again, not just what Desjardins and your guy and Olivier Cool were doing with that offense that was spectacular, but with how dominant that defense was, on top of the fact that it was a really young defense. And again, in just reading my notes here, I'm hoping that I'm not gonna butcher the names too much. But when you look at guys like Christopher Saint-Hilaire, Justin Cloutier, Jordan Lassard, Yohan Myange, Edward Bolduc, an assortment of players from the front seven to the defensive secondary, who last year were all either in the second year or younger. I think I have that right. And you look at a guy like Justin Cloutier, I mean, just to sort of talk about him a little bit extra before I pass it on to you, we've talked a lot about a certain linebacker from Quebec named Justin, who might be the best linebacker in all of Canada. Well, this Justin from Quebec might also have a claim to that fame. So it'll be interesting as well, thinking about the way we talk about projecting possible award winners at the end of the year. A possible battle between Justin Pace and Justin Cloutier, just to look at these two conferences alone, is a magnificent thing to think about. But, and obviously there's still the offense to look at. Like, that's the funny thing, but just that defense alone, and I know there's names that probably, hopefully if we have some fans out of Quebec City listening to this, they're like, oh, you didn't mention so-and-so, and more power to them. But like that assortment of names and how young they were and what they did last year in reaching the pinnacle and lifting up that Vanier is just so special. And it's just, the youth is what I can't really get my head around more than anything.
Yeah, I think one or two of their starting defensive tackles were both in first year when they were out for the Laval Rouge et Or. And I got a chance, once again, the East West Bowl is easily one of my favorite events of all time because you get a celebration of football, but you also get coaches who are back there to do coaches clinics. And one of the guys who was speaking was Coach Glenn Constantine, arguably the greatest USports football coach of all time, certainly in winning percentage. And he's talking to us about defensive pass rush and how you're talking, or how do you really develop defensive linemen. And he's showing clips from Laval versus Regina and saying, hey, look at this guy here. Oh yeah, that guy, he's like 6'6", 342 pounds, and he's a first-year player. He's like 19 or 20 years old. And you're like, well, that's disgusting. Oh my God. But once again, being that young team, they won a Vanier last year, and I think they only lose like 3 players off of that entire team. So this is a squad that could very easily redo and re-win. The word I'm trying to use here?
There you go.
There you go. But I think that this is a squad that, if anything, the defense in particular, because how young they were, are gonna get better than where they were last year. And this is a team that held the best offense last year to to just a couple of touchdowns in that Vanier Cup. So this is a really talented Laval squad, and it's only going to get better, at least defensively here.
1000%. And as we always talk about, I mean, you're referencing the Laurier Golden Hawks, and that, as we talk about with teams all the time, and Laurier being a perfect example, when your defense gets to be tested. I mean, obviously we know once the season gets into the thick of things, your ones are playing twos and vice versa. But to get tested by, the talent in this offense that starts with Arnaud Desjardins, our guy in Arnaud Desjardins, your guy in Olivier Cool, and then the youngster in Angel Vital we saw at East West. And it really looks like it's his year to sort of take the reins behind what will undoubtedly be a human tidal wave of an offensive line, because it always is. And along with a couple receivers behind Cool, that will then no doubt reap the trickle effect that we always talk about when you have to pay more attention towards one guy, a couple of guys in Mugande and Caldun. I think I'm reading my writing correctly, who kind of fall into that maybe like behind Cool, who might be able to reap the benefits of. Anything else on the offense for Laval, or just from our conversation with Desjardins back in the winter last year, or just from that standpoint, what you're most excited to see?
Yeah, I mentioned it, but I am really excited to see, once again, the growth and the potential that Arnaud Desjardins has. I mean, last year, he finished it with 189 completions for a 75% completion rating, 2,373 yards passing, 17 touchdowns to 1 interception. That is the best interception to touchdown rating of anybody in the entire league, with a minimum 100 attempts here. So this is a guy who is already near the top of his game, with another year under his belt, with more chemistry with guys like Olivier Cool and the rest of that offense. Like, this is going to be a very dominant Laval team. There's a reason why most people have them in their number 1 spot coming out of this year.
Tom, I'm going to ask you the question first, and then we can I have some numbers in front of me we can go over. And I thought the question alone would be interesting. And then as I was kind of trying to verify what the answer was, I was like, this is just more insane than I even realized. Because if Laval goes on to repeat this year, it raises the question, and I'll throw it to you, Tom. Who was the last team to repeat as Vanier Cup champs, and when?
Wow. It would have to be Laval Rouge et Or.
It is. It is. And it's, yeah, go ahead. It is.
I can't even remember.
So we were you and I were both active for this whole run. And I say active as players in CIS football then. But so we obviously, where do I want to start? So they take out Calgary in 2013, 25-14. The year before, right? They got you guys. So that's the back-to-back. But of course, they were in another Vanier Cup the year before, because you kicked the crap out of them in that one. Well, I mean, the overtime thriller. But they won against Calgary the year before that in 2010. So they go 3 out of 4. They go to 4 consecutive Vaniers from 2010 through 2013 and win 3 of them, including the back-to-back. and oh yeah, they beat Western and Avanier 2 years prior, and I just I words have no meaning at this point when you describe how good, when you were talking to Coach Constantine, and I remember, you asking him about, some of those, because with him being beyond just like one of the great head coaches or entraîneur en chef, I think it's the French, whatever, of just, but being that defensive line focus and asking about all those great guys and obviously about, probably the best he's ever had in Matthew Betts. And I remember him just being like, when you get a player like Matthew Betts, the best thing you can do is just kind of stay out of his way, right? And it's just like Laval's just that kind of special where it's like, how do you even try to explain or understand? It's just wow, what a darn program. Now,
Yeah, when you talk
yeah,
about a Glenn Constantine and getting a chance to speak with him and hear him speak, there is no ego. There is a competitor who is there who obviously wants to win football games and who loves the sport. But when you talk to him about, hey, you came all the way to Ontario, came to Waterloo to specifically A, see your guys perform in a East West for sure, but B, you're also doing this coaches clinic. Like, what's the motivation there? He said, honestly, it's to give back to the game that gave me so much. I remember being a young coach and having some guys who were there for me and they were giving me information, imparting their wisdom. So I want to do the same thing back. And you see the greatest, the winningest coach in USports history just care about the game and caring about wanting to give back. This is the culture that's there, the pride that's there with this Laval Rouge et Or team, and certainly the love that he has garnered from all of those fans is completely deserved. I have nothing but incredible things to say about that man, even if he got my goose pretty good in 2012.
if you're gonna lose to anyone, right?
Yeah.
Let it be someone like that. Now, Tom, we could end the RSEQ conversation there because year in, year out, it doesn't take all that much more than looking at how's Laval looking, how's Montreal looking. And as far as the top of the RSEQ standings, the likelihood of, what the Coupe Dunsmore 2025 is going to look like, I'm assuming that we're going to get the same matchup as always. But to, to at least extend our knowledge a little bit more, I think we have to have a little short conversation about the McGill Redbirds. And not just because, and the conversation does have to start because of how fantastic a quarterback they have in Eloa Latendresse Regimbald, who I think you had told me last year, it's like a lot of people even in the locker room like, hey, we'll just call you ELR. And I think we'll just continue with that moniker for right now. But the outstanding things that he's doing for the Redbirds, but then also this being a team, and of course they got our guy in JT Copeland Lewis there, hailing from Texas of all places. I did not know that. But a McGill team that seemingly in the same year can, take out Sherbrooke in an overtime game, but then lose to and also beat Sherbrooke by only 3. But then in their last game of the regular season, or pardon me, their second last game of the regular season, lose to Laval 30-17. And in some ways, when you look at ELR's year, it kind of like this team seems almost like if they're really firing, they might be able to get darn near anyone in here. But some of the holes on this team, at least from looking at what they were doing last year, when you look at the number of sacks ELR racked up, and just the points on that defense in general, it's like it kind of feels like, and them being that sort of third slotted team feels like, yeah, you're there because on your best day, you can at least kind of give Laval a bit of a scare, but you can also lose to the team in Sherbrooke that is, right now holding it down at the bottom right now. We can just talk about ELR because obviously we don't deep dive these teams for a reason. We're not there yet, but this is a fascinating McGill team to say the least.
Yeah, I really am excited to see what his development looks like in the rest of this McGill offense. I mean, last year, 2,061 passing yards, 8 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. He really exploded out onto the scene and wowed a whole lot of people. I mean, McGill finished 4-4 last year, and I think all 4 of their losses were against Laval and Montreal, if I'm not mistaken. But this is a squad that I think is really going to be pushing in certain cases here. But like you said, like in that last playoff game, they get blown out pretty good by Montreal. That defense really comes to play, and ELR gets sacked 6 times in that loss. one way to make sure that you are staying in every game is to keep your quarterback off the ground. If he's getting sacked 6 times, you can best know that he's getting pressured and hit pretty well constantly. So if they can find a way to protect this young man, who obviously was their leading passer, but I'm pretty sure was also their leading rusher in this as well. This is a guy who can be the focal point of your offense, get a few other pieces around him, shore up that offensive line. You can start making some pushes here, or at least getting some really close games between the top two in the RSEQ.
Well, first and foremost, I think I had this stat earlier. I was trying to double check it. Tom, he was not just their leading rusher. I'm pretty sure he led the RSEQ in rushing yards last year. Yeah, he ran for 781 yards and 9 touchdowns. He averaged 97.6 yards per game. And again, hey, look, I'll just say it right here. I'll speak for myself. I did not watch McGill Redbird football last year, right? I tried to tune in towards the end of the year to get a sense of how Montreal and Laval are doing. I'll watch that Dunsmore Cup, and beyond that, try to increase it here and there steadily where I can. But you look at just some of those numbers and trying to like read the tea leaves of it all, you think, okay, so clearly he's got the athleticism and he's like a solid 6'4". He's got a great build on him, sits in the pocket really well to just get that ball out. But you think, okay, clearly he likes to run around a little bit. It's probably a bit of both, but you wonder, okay, are some of those sacks because he's extending plays with his feet, trying to, do a little dipsy doodle and then running his way into a sack? He just held on too long. How much of those rushing yards are because his pocket is collapsing and he's relying on his feet to be able to keep things going? One way or the other, neither option is great, but you know that you have a talent of all talents who, I think without, again, knowing who's going to be taking the reins at Montreal, and without going into, apologies to Concordia and Sherbrooke, without really going into your teams at least on this podcast, he's, without seeing a down of football, certainly the second quarterback in that province, like without a doubt. And obviously between him and Desjardins, it was an interesting conversation last year alone. Tom, pick up on that as much as you want to. Otherwise, I'll do the same thing here. We saw Sherbrooke miss the playoffs. And obviously we're not talking about Sherbrooke and Concordia, so maybe it's a bit of an odd question to ask. As far as the playoff makeup going into the Dunsmore Cup playoffs, do you see anything shaking up in Quebec for next year? And do you see really a shakeup generally across the board?
No, I think this is going to be a very similar result going into this year. I think that Montreal fans seem to believe, and it's not seem to believe, but it is true. Every time that Montreal is the underdog going into a game, they tend to play the upset pretty well. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the same thing going into this one. But God, when you look at Laval across the board, they are easily one of the most impressive teams in the country here. So I just have to assume that it's going to be them hoisting that Dunsmore Cup once again.
And very likely some other trophy in the weeks to follow that. And actually, before we jump over to CanWest, just to pause and say, right now we're having Bishops come out of we're lifting a Loney. We're having Laval lift up a Dunsmore Cup. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, that according to us then, that would also be your UTEC Bowl matchup for 2025. Is that right?
That is correct. That is correct. This year it's the CanWest against the OUA and the RSEQ against the AUS. We believe that it's the RSEQ traveling to the AUS, but it is 100% the CanWest traveling to the OUA as well.
Oh, boo-hoo. Laval has to travel from Quebec City to Lennoxville. I'm sure that drive is what? 4 hours? Actually, who knows? It could be longer. My knowledge of Quebec geography is going to increase exponentially by the end of this football season here. But this podcast will not rest until we talk a little CanWest football. Tom, my prep for this conference was more, I'm going through these teams, and I love CanWest football. And they're in such a healthy place right now. I think in some ways, as much as, we still have the best conference in the OUA because we have, we run the deepest, and the talent pool also is amongst the top. When you have these conferences and, CanWest having the 6 teams, it just makes it feel almost like each team kind of has that much more of a punch to it, right? We're talking about the playoff shakeup from last year and against a CanWest that last year ended up up with Manitoba number one at 7-1, Saskatchewan 5-3, UBC 5-3, Regina 3-5, of course, on route to that miracle run to a Hardy Cup that was so exciting, and then giving Laval a really nice game in that Mitchell Bowl. Alberta at 2-6 and Calgary at 2-6. But then just thinking about like, man, what a like that's awesome to be able to know that your playoff matchups, just quarterback alone, Anton Ammonrood for Saskatchewan, Garrett Rooker, UBC, Noah Pelletier with Regina, and of course, Jackson Tuchinski with Manto. Like that is just knowing as a conference that last year you go into the playoffs and you can just beyond like without going any further, you can just say, all right, look, this matchup is Tuchinski versus Pelletier. It's Ammonrood versus Rooker. That is a great thing as a conference, generally speaking, just to be able to hang your hat on, if to say nothing more about it. And frankly, there's so much more to add on to it, but just that alone has me really excited because I think 4 for 4, we're all back next year as far as those teams and their quarterbacks, correct?
Yes, they are. And the thing that I'm almost the most excited for in terms of a quarterback and coach relationship is now you're going to have Anton Ammonrood with new offensive coordinator, quarterback coach Mason Nias also
Yes.
leading him, and getting a chance to talk to Mason Nias when I was out at East West once again. A, just to say how big of a fan that I am of that dude. He was impressive as all hell when he was a player not that long ago. And B, to talk to him about Anton Ammonrood and just the nature of who he is as a quarterback, because he is, if there is one guy, in my opinion, across the entire league that perfectly personifies the idea of a gunslinger quarterback, it is Anton Ammonrood. I mean, you look at a guy who slings touchdowns like it's his day job, and very well could be if he keeps this going up there. And then you look at, well, that interception rating is also pretty damn high as well. And there's a reason why that's the case. And he's not afraid to show it. I mean, finished with 11 touchdowns and 9 interceptions at the end of the year. That's a spot that can get you into a bit of trouble, and certainly where SAS saw a lot of their issues last year as well. But man, to see Mason and Anton get in there, and to even have Mason say, like, I think previously Anton Amaru was kind of seeing the entire field as it was. Let's get this simplified. Hey, you got a 3-man concept on this side. If 1, 2 aren't open, get to 3. If 3's not there, you either take off and run and find the check down, and just simplify it, have the field. And when you hear Mason start talking about what he's going to be doing here, Ant's going to have a huge year this year.
Ant-Man, that's it for sure.
Ant-Man.
As soon as you said Mason Nias' name, I could just somewhere here in the distance, Nate Hobbs just bark. "Arr." He's doing it again. I know our guy Nate loves him some Husky football out there. And I guess just sticking with Saskatchewan for right now, because there's some pretty like interesting questions as far as the talent pool around him that I don't know if we have answers to, but an affirmative or a positive answer to these could very much make Sask. And again, and we'll get into your experiences out in CanWest, but make Sask perhaps the front runner for this conference if we're able to confirm the likes of Riker Frank and Daniel Weeb coming back. Because man, oh man, and just again the fact that there's a chance that we make it out to Saskatchewan at the end of the USports season, right? Fingers crossed. We'll see how that all breaks out. And for so many reasons, that'd be great. And if for nothing other than just to get a taste of that culture, of that football culture out there, much like we'll experience being out in Quebec, and the fact that you have these guys that are Saskatchewan native, in playing, growing up and playing football, and then being with that team, Daniel Weeb getting to spend time with the Rough Riders too, which is just so cool. I love that for this community, and again, whether it's this year, that will be on the bucket list of things to experience Saskatchewan football wholeheartedly. But Riker Frank, Daniel Weeb, those names appearing on a week 1 participation list would make me very, very all in type feel about this Huskies team. Do we know much about that situation currently?
So still up in the air on Riker Frank. I believe he has the potential to come back here. But 100% Daniel Weeb is back on this offense. And when you see that connection between Anton Ammonrood and Daniel Weeb, but even like getting a chance to talk to Scott Flory a little bit more about this and about his offense and his mentality into certain things, it's hilarious, not hilarious, but it's interesting to look at because he is a former offensive lineman in the CFL, a fantastic career when he was there, and a really accomplished coach. And typically, when you talk to an offensive lineman like you and me, you're like, well, we're going to run the damn ball and we're going to commit to that and everything. He is the complete opposite. He is a spread offense guy, even so far as to say, if I if I'm going to recruit a running back, he has to be able to catch the ball. If he can't catch, I don't care how good he is on the ground. I'm not recruiting him. I'm not touching him. Even to the point where I'm talking to, a few other guys. I don't know if he would have recruited all that heavily Isaiah Knight. And he obviously had such an incredible career at UBC. Like that's just a look into that. And also, the last thing that I'll say, when you get a compliment from a guy like Greg Marshall, if Glenn Constantine is number one, then Greg Marshall's number two in terms of all-time best coaches. And he pipes up in a coaches meeting once again saying, the University of Saskatchewan runs zone better than anybody else across the country. That says something to the point where we're in a chalk talk session and Coach Flory is up there saying, hey guys, like, what do you want to know? Coach Marshall brings that up and I say, okay, great. Like, how do you teach zone? He goes, well, I'm not saying that. I'm not giving that away. I'll talk passing routes. I'll talk passing trees as much as you want. I'm not giving away how I run zone.
Well, and that's, I mean, you're right. I mean, to get that of all compliments to receive, like any compliment from Greg Marshall, you take it, you put it in your pocket, you save it for a rainy day. Specifically, him saying that you run. I mean, if you were to say you run power football better than anyone, that would truly be the pinnacle. But just you think about but it's fascinating because again, it makes the Riker Frank question that much more essential because I'm certain a lot of Riker Frank's success has been that they coach him up the right way and how to be a zone runner, but more so to gap running schemes. My experience in coaching and playing tell me that like a good zone runner is more of a thing than being a good gap runner. Like that's more of that downhill patience so you get those lead blockers ahead of you. But zone blocking and being able to let those double teams develop, that patience to the line, finding even just that half a yard of daylight and just breaking through. So I'm sure part of that falls on the fact that Riker Frank is just that kind of talent. A lot of it falls onto the scheme, how they're blocking it up and how they developed him. So that's, I mean, the weed piece is outstanding, just hearing that alone. And, even when you mention like Amandrud's numbers, the touchdown to interception rate, I feel like there's still, like for CanWest players, I feel like there's almost like a bit of a qualifier for me sometimes with those numbers because it's just like, my instinct, I haven't gone through all the data on this, but we just know from watching it, they throw the ball way more. It's so much more. And I don't want to give away, your stories and we're going to get into your time out in Alberta, but just of like, it is different from OUA football. And it is more as we see when we tune in, not just that it's a production with CanWest TV that looks more like the CFL. It's a version of football that looks more like the CFL. Mm-hmm. So I say all that and that like, that's a lot of pressure on these quarterbacks. So if that touchdown interception ratio is not quite as clean as other conferences where it's maybe a bit more of like, hey, we know that this is our shot play here and there. We're going to be a bit more conservative in the passing game. And ultimately it's going to start with our run game. Then maybe you get a bit more of a generous split there. But nonetheless, I mean, just hearing that about Weeb is having me alone thinking that Sask might be able to take it all. But of course, it is Jackson Tatinsky and his Manitoba squad top of the ranks last year. When you think about Manitoba, obviously it's Tachinski, but then you have to think about with Braden Stubbs. Do we know about the status of Stubbs possibly being back there? And just generally speaking, what's your sort of inclination of what we can expect from this Manitoba squad?
Tachinski back, Braden Stubbs back. These guys are going to reload, in my opinion. It's going to be between Saskatchewan and Manitoba as the top two teams, in my opinion, in this running here. I'm really interested to see the growth that Jackson has going into this year. I mean, he finished with 120 completions for 65% completion rating, 1,662 yards passing, 8 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. And when you look at that, you say, you know what, that's decent, but it's not blow your socks off. It's really in the run game where he brought all of his capabilities. I mean, when you look at even in the top rushing from across the country here, you've got Braden Stubbs, who led the league with 951 yards rushing. And on the same team, you've got Jackson Tatinsky rushing for 559 yards rushing. Like this is a team that just took off constantly, and it's one of those squads very similar to a Montreal and a Jonathan Senecal, where you're walking into this as a defense being like, okay, these are the concepts that they like to run. We can lock down this receiver. Okay, this is awesome. Oh, our rush happened to leave the B gap open, and Jackson Tachinski just ran for 60 yards and a touchdown. So having that capability and having that wrinkle in every offense is really what's going to put Manitoba over the edge, in my opinion, here, and just being so versatile. I think that's going to do a whole hell of a lot for them this season.
Let's move into UBC. Obviously, a team that is 2 years off of a visit to the Vanier. And again, I'll throw it to you as far as if you've come across anything different to this effect, but possibly, well, I think you used past tense earlier in talking about Isaiah Knight. So think that's giving away your answer there. But the combination of Garrett Rooker, Isaiah Knight, Sam Davenport is sort of the core mixture of what made that offense so explosive, getting them to a Vanier Cup 2 years ago. Again, based on how you talked about Isaiah Knight moments ago, I feel like you're giving away that he might not be back for the Thunderbirds. But what else do we know about how UBC is looking to return this year?
Yeah, Isaiah Knight, as far as I am aware, is not going to be back for the UBC Thunderbirds this year, which is a huge blow to that offense. I mean, he was so incredible. And obviously, with Coach Stevenson Bone moving on to the University of Alberta Golden Bears, there's a new offensive coordinator in tow. I have total confidence in Blake Nill. I mean, he's one of the best coaches that we have as well. So he's going to have these guys ready to go. But I am really interested to see what the new offensive mentality is going to be like with the Thunderbirds here. Garrett Rooker, still a fantastic quarterback. I believe he is back for his last year for the Thunderbirds along with Sam Davenport. And it seems like every year they've got NFL caliber talent on the offensive line, with Theo Bennett being down in Chicago and Dakota Shepley a few years ago and all of that. So I think that this offense for UBC should still be solid. It's going to be really interesting to see how they can come together, especially with the other two teams or the other teams in this entire conference. I mean, I talk about, yeah, it should be Manitoba and Saskatchewan, but a 3-5 Regina team finished the season, ran the table, and won the Hardy Cup. So this is a incredibly competitive conference where it really seems like anything can happen.
And let's talk about those Regina Rams. Out of the fact that, again, that was such an incredible run that they went on, and because just from the defense alone and what we saw from Peltier, you're totally right that there's no reason to not think, well, shoot, like we saw last year, like might not be the betting favorite, but do you really want to count him out? And I think it has to start with that defense, thinking about guys. I remember you putting me on to Delaney Robinson, I think, when you saw him at East West 2 years ago. And then the Sombach brothers, I believe it is, the two of them in there as well with that defense, and a couple other just like terrific players that made them, as good as anyone in USports last year. That defense, what Peltier does on the offensive side of the ball for them. What are you thinking about with this Regina team going into this year, especially when, to whatever extent, they were maybe slept on last year? Teams aren't gonna, think twice about like pedal to the metal, like, full steam ahead against this team coming into 25.
The one thing that I will say, one of the things that they're going to have to look at going into this year is they lost, and I quote from another coach in the CanWest, the best boundary corner in CanWest and potentially in the country, in Delaney Robinson. He is now with the Calgary Stampeders. I got a chance to see him a few years ago at East West, and he was unbelievable at what he did, and he continued his lockdown capabilities in CanWest going into last year as well. So losing him is a massive blow to this defense. But I am interested, once again, let's see what Noah Peltier can really go into here. And we talked so highly about Laval and how incredible they were. Let's not forget that Regina took them within 3 points in the Mitchell Bowl last year. I mean, if not for a final 11-play, 85-yard drive in the fourth quarter, we might be seeing Regina versus Laurier in a Vanier Cup, which would have been unbelievable to see. But I think that a good number of this Regina defense is still back. I believe that Noah Peltier is going to get better and better as he goes on. I mean, he finished with 356 yards passing against the Laval defense that we know how good they are. But one of the things, once again, in hearing Coach Constantine talk, one of Noah Peltier's best attributes that I think is slept on a little bit is how elusive he is in the pocket. He had no sacks. No sacks were given up by Laval. And trust me, that Regina offensive line had a day dealing with the studs that they have up front. But either through quick passes or the ability to maneuver in the pocket, Noah Peltier did a great job eluding that rush. And I'm expecting him to continue that going forward into this year as well.
Now I'm just wondering because Regina does have a roster that says 2025 on it, and that's where I got mixed up with Delani on there. And so I'm gonna have to deep dive at another point about at least I think Carson Sombach is the one who was listed as a fourth year. So we'll see how that plays out. But you're totally right with what Peltier did in that semifinal game, and just it's really just all coming back to me of like, wow, no, that was a clean day for him in there, which few teams can say that when they take on the Rouge et Or. Tom, takes us now to the two teams in Alberta and Calgary who weren't in the Hardy Cup playoffs last year, but who you have been able to visit and really see how they're looking this year live and direct from their training camps. Really, there's nothing else I can say, but Tom, take it away.
Yeah, I was incredibly lucky to get a chance to see the University of Alberta Golden Bears. As those on the YouTube stream can see, I've been rocking the sweater that I got from Coach Bone and Coach Jean Gav, which was incredible. And I love this sweater. It's a nice one too. But to see that capability and what they were looking like day one at training camp and seeing what is happening here with a new head coach and a new defensive coordinator and a bunch of new guys, and you go, there's a lot of question marks here for sure. And then you start looking around, you're going, yeah, I think Stevenson Bone has proved himself as a coach, as an offensive coordinator at bare minimum. What he did with the University of British Columbia Thunderbirds, taking them to a Vanier Cup, and what he was able to do with Garrett Rooker and the rest of that offense. He's going to be head coach and offensive coordinator going into this year as well. So we'll see what he brings to the Golden Bears. But it seems like, once again, there's we talked about it earlier, the expansion of Greg Marshall's coaching tree is even more so now. And to see head coach and offensive coordinator graduated from Western, and a linebacker, now defensive coordinator in Jean-Gab Poulin, who graduated from Western, that Western influence is going to bleed into the CanWest most definitely here. But when you start looking around, you say, okay, Coach Bone and Jean-Gab Poulin, yeah, that's impressive. How about Armando Sewell, longtime CFL veteran, coaching up the defensive line and seeing guys like, you can tell immediately that this team is getting better and better. You've got Jordan Lieberman coaching up the defensive backs and the intensity that he brings, and Smith Wright. The coaching staff is there, cares so much about this team and this program. I am very, very excited about where this is going. I mean, you get a first-year kid in Ethan Stewart, offensive lineman, puts up 45 reps on the bench going into his first or second year. Like, this is massive, and you've got monsters on this offense and defensive line, including their left guard, who affectionately is known as Iwi, and I don't want to butcher his last name, but number 50 for them. He went off and got drafted and came back this year. He looks unbelievable. I am really looking forward to him and the rest of that offensive line and what they can do. But the other guy who really stood out to me and is going to be a force this year no matter what is number 90 defensive lineman Emerson Joy. He was in his first year last year. He's listed at 6'6", 230. When I saw him, I wouldn't be surprised if he's looking at 240, 250 type deal. And he's all of that 6'6". This is a talented dude that you have to be on the lookout for. I saw him bench pressing offensive linemen off of him, and I saw him doing some really incredible work. With the work ethic that he's very clearly put in the offseason, along with his new defensive line coach and Armando Sewell, I really think that this kid is going to be a force to reckon with. I would not be surprised if he's going to be a CanWest All-Star this year.
One, and if there's a case for any team to make a jump into a playoff round robin and just to ascend, generally speaking praises about their O&D line is a great place to start. And just sticking on the offensive line side of things to kind of expand a bit sort of broadly now in the context of that offense and what Coach Bone might be looking to do there. They've, obviously a guy in Matthew Peterson's been as consistent as all heck for them. And you'll obviously be able to correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe done now, or is he back? Okay, the head nod there confirming yes. But we did get to see at the or I guess I got to see being at the regional combine last year in Oshanubi. And as far as I know, he wasn't picked up by a CFL team. Was he rocking with? No, back with
He's
Alberta.
back with the Alberta Golden Bears. He was not picked up by a CFL team.
So is Oshanubi looking like RB1 for them?
He's certainly in the conversation. We'll have to see who ultimately comes out of that. There was a couple of guys that really impressed me there. I mean, I was really hoping to see one of their other star running backs that I saw with this squad, but Oceanubi looks to be the first guy that we think of. I mean, when you have the fastest CFL 40 time, you automatically get into that spot. But I'm interested to see what this offense is going to look like because is Coach Bone going to do a lot of power run game? Is he going to do a lot of zone run game? There's with that, and obviously you and I both know very different running back needs in terms of being able to read and find a gap in a zone versus just put your head down and get to a gap in a power. So I think Oceanubi certainly in the conversation. I don't know if he's going to be outright RB1.
I'm also just now because as I could sort of look at the Alberta roster in front of me, we obviously the success of Mac Bannatyne, and I don't remember where he's playing now, but obviously having his success starting with York, going to Alberta, and sorry, where is it? Oh,
Sorry?
because Bannatyne got he's in the CFL now, right? I believe
He is in the CFL. I don't know that off the top of my head.
But seeing here as well the likes of Jackson Hume, who I don't know if he'll be if you saw him at the camp, but another York line that I guess made his way there, and also seeing Ao Ajayi, former laureate. What? Okay, all right, interesting. Interesting. Sorry, getting used to this whole CanWest business out here and trying to cover it the way we hope to. Tom, any other notes coming out of U of A?
Yeah, I was really interested to see once again, getting a chance to see training camps and seeing different teams doing training camps and how they do things. Coach Bone put an emphasis on reps. Let's get as many reps as we possibly can. And let's not forget that as he's coming in here with a new head coach, especially new offensive coordinator, everybody's getting looked at. So Eli Hetlinger, who is obviously the starter for the past couple of seasons here, he's getting first team reps along with a guy named Cade LeBrecq, and both of these guys look pretty damn impressive. Hetlinger with obviously the experience and the know-how being in those top games and winning in a lot of them, but Cade LeBrecq coming in being all of 6'2" and 210 and having that the more of the frame, I guess you could say, compared to Hetlinger's 6 foot with 193. But when I talk about that, you've got a double barrel situation, meaning you've got like an entire offense and defense on one side, an entire offense and defense on the other side, and then you've got guys who are mixed in that first year or in that first team, excuse me, on both sides. And it's the moment that one rep's done, here's the next rep. And the moment that that rep's done, here's the next rep. I'm sure that's going to be an absolute nightmare for their film crew. But in terms of utilizing a session, you're pumping out 20, 30, 40 reps within a 10 to 20 minute session, whether that's Skelly, whether that's team on air, or whether that's 12 on 12. So it was really impressive to see that and getting all of those reps and getting as many people as possible. Minimal coaching in between reps, but that's what film session is for afterwards. So it was really impressive to see that on day one. Guys really seem to buy into the program and how they're running things.
And you brought up just between Coach Bone and Jean Gab, part of that Western legacy, but specifically with Stevenson Bone, just this guy's been doing football since probably as long as he could crawl, just with his father Jamie Bone and just that added piece on there. So really exciting to see what he's going to be able to build for himself. And I'm excited to ask you about the CanWest playoff picture, but not before we talk about the other stop you made in Calgary, visiting with the Dinos, visiting with your former head coach as a member of the Guelph Griffins coaching staff in Ryan Sheehan, and what is happening out there. What were your takeaways visiting with the Dinos?
This is easily going to be one of the most interesting teams to watch, if for no other reason because of their makeup. There were 106 guys out at training camp that I saw. 53 were fourth or fifth year guys, and the other 53 were first or second year guys coming in. There was no second or third year or in that mix players at all on this team. So no matter what, you are losing a good chunk, if not all, of those returning seniors next year, and you've got a very young team coming in. So this was a squad that looks very veteran and very young all at the same time, just purely because of who's the best fits and whatever else. I think the entire quarterback room is all in their first year as well. So this is going to be a very big thrown into the fire type of deal, dealing with the CanWest and the rest of those outstanding defenses here. So there will not be Dom Britton and Ben Britton are no longer on the Calgary Dinos. I'm not sure if they're playing anywhere else. I don't believe that they are, but not seeing them at practice really had my eyes wide and saying, what is the makeup of this team going to be?
And there's so many ways that just as outsiders, we can probably sort of prognosticate on why you would have that split. I think I don't do it as often, but I guess to be fair, there's just something to be said about the fact that new guy comes in, he's going to bring in his group of guys, and then there's a sort of a generation of players that are going to leave. Sometimes, obviously, people don't see it eye to eye with, well, I was brought in by somebody to be part of this type of system, and if it's not there anymore, we're certainly living in an age where, while not the extent of the NCAA, where it does seem like players feel more comfortable at saying, like, hey, look, I know what I bring to the table, and I was brought here to do so. There's another place I can be to be able to go explore that. And I don't think that speaks poorly about the new head coach when that does occur. It's just a product of, hey, this is how sports works seemingly at every level. So very fascinating dynamic. And I'm sure, like it's in some ways, there's also that way of saying of, again, we talked about 5 teams already in the CanWest, all of whom are like, we can get you can make a case, and if you want to make the case of how the Golden Bears end up raising a Hardy Cup this year, I'm very much here for that. But at least we're all those 5 teams we talked about are in the playoffs, so you might be able to say, hey, Calgary, look, hopefully it's not 2-6 again, but maybe that same way that we've talked about teams like, in the OUA of progress doesn't always have to be an extra win in the win column per se. If you're making those right steps, and if those veteran guys are helping those young guys come along, you're starting to see how that quarterback room shakes out, who's able to replace the Britton brothers, so on and so forth. Then you can still say, okay, look, that's really what success looks like for us, all the while having a young group of guys under the specific system. So I feel like that would be the generous interpretation of it, but no doubt there's other incredible stories you have from your time with Calgary.
Yeah, I mean, when you get a chance to see so many different teams and getting a chance to really view this, Calgary gets in there with a very much, here's your first group, here's your second group, here's your third group. And in that setting, there still can be teams or players that get switched around, whether that's new quarterbacks or whatever else. But for that day, this is the first group, this is the second group, and so on and so forth. So a different mentality going into all of that. What I will say is that their offensive and defensive line, while maybe young, they are going to be a force to be reckoned with. Number 65, Chris Onunkor, he's going to be their left tackle. I think he's going into his second year. I think he's been playing football for 2 years, and already the athleticism that's there is off the charts. I think he's going to easily be one of the stalwarts on that offensive line, being at that left tackle spot. You've got a number of returning guys who look really impressive. Brad Armstrong being another one, I believe, at that right guard position. And even their center, number 64, Braden Seisman. What I love the most about this young man going into his 4th year, he's the starting center. And there was a time where in that, when you get into group 3, group 4, group 5, sometimes offensive linemen, you've only got like 14 or 15 guys. So some guys have to go back and forth. So there was one guy who was out and they needed a right tackle. And somebody turns to the sideline and say, hey, I need a right tackle for this rep. And Braden Seisman, being the starting center, sprints out onto the field and takes a few tackle reps because the team needs them. And when you see stuff like that, that's really what fires me up. But once again, sticking on the defensive line as well, there's a number of guys on there, but one guy in particular, I believe it was number 94, Styles LePage, who was really outstanding. Sylvester Ebelo, I believe, as well, was another guy to really look out for. But these guys that offense, we'll have to see. Obviously, losing the Britton brothers is massive to them, and how well that offensive line is going to come together, especially with having a few young guys. But the strength and the heart of that team is going to be their defense. They were flying around pretty well, and even with Boschman leaving, the defensive secondary looks pretty solid.
That was the last thing I wanted to ask you, because we talked about with Western, how do you replace the Jackson Finley? How do year after year seemingly fill in that gap? So you see it from the sounds of it, and I'm sure there isn't a Boschman 2.0 in the wings, but didn't feel like a massive gap there.
No, there certainly did not feel like a massive gap. I think the guys that they have in the back end, well, you're not going to replace a Boschman right off the hop. The collective guys in the back end seem to be doing pretty well. The talk and communication that you see is obviously a great asset whenever you see that on a team. And I think that this is going to be a very seasoned defense for the most part.
Well, Tom, with that in mind, let's take a look 1 through 6 and talk about who those top 4 they're going to be competing for a Hardy Cup are come October-ish of 2025. Do you see a shakeup in the mix right now? And if so, of course, Tom, if you're saying one of those 2 teams that didn't make it are going to make it, I need you to say who they're replacing, because you look good with that Golden Bear sweater on you. What do you see reading the tea leaves in, for us, I suppose, what's our way too early predictions for a little CanWest football here?
Man, this is easily one of the most difficult kind of question marks to kind of look at here. Obviously, I think I'd have the same kind of difficulty if I was doing the same thing with the OUA, not specifically seeing everybody in person and all that. But I have to, with the guys that I saw, the coaching staff and the players, I'm betting that the Golden Bears get into the playoffs. If they're going to bump anybody else out, I guess it would be the reigning Hardy Cup champions in the Regina Rams. But that seems insane to say out loud. Although even if they finish at 3-5 last year in the regular season, but I just think that with Manitoba and Saskatchewan, with how good those guys look, UBC always having a pretty stout squad, and what I saw from the Alberta Golden Bears, I think those are my 4 teams getting it into the playoffs.
It's I'm you know what, good on you for actually going through the exercise that passed your way, because that was not fair of me to do so. And it's again, here's the unfortunate thing of the smaller conferences is that, well, you can't have a 5 playoff tier. It doesn't make sense with the odd number, let alone if you can't obviously do a bye with that number of teams there. So then your other option is to say, well, do we do a 6-team playoffs with 2 byes? And obviously, that's not the worst thing, but when you only have 6 teams, you don't really want it to be that everyone makes the playoffs. But golly, from everything that you've said about Alberta and just the conversation about this conference as a whole, golly, I'm sure this isn't the only time that CanWest has deserved that extra playoff team in there, but there are going to be a deserving club not making the playoffs out of the CanWest this time around. Tom, final thoughts, CanWest football, heck, even RSEQ football, AUS football, anything we covered today or anything we didn't get to cover yet that you wanted to just let folks know before we kind of say bye to the other conferences with, as much detail as we can bring you until about the mid-season point of the season? What's sort of your parting thoughts for these 3 conferences?
I think that this is going to be one of the best years for USports football across the board. I mean, we say that damn near every year, I'm sure, because we're just so excited. But when you look at all of the talent that's across here, yes, you've got the same 2 teams in the RSEQ, but when you look at a McGill squad that easily has one of the most exciting quarterbacks across the country and the potential that they have, there's going to be some exciting games in the queue, obviously, with Laval versus Montreal being the centerpiece in there for a few times. But I would not be surprised to see McGill fighting in certain games there. In the AUS, to see Bishops come out on top here, winning the AUS for the first time last year, and to see a Saint FX squad that I know is going to be hungry to get back onto that top, especially with Silas Vagnon in his last year and really pushing Justin Carillon and how well they're going to do. I can't wait to see what's going to happen there. And top to bottom, the CanWest football has some of the best football across the country here. I mean, when you look at what Manitoba should be, what Saskatchewan has the potential to be, if Anton Amaru can get those interceptions under control and start throwing a few more touchdowns, especially with outstanding coaching from Mason Nias and Scott Flory and the rest of that staff, this is going to be a team to not only look for a Hardy Cup, but potentially make a Vanier Cup appearance. And especially with the Vanier Cup this year being in Saskatchewan, that'd be a hell of a time to have. But looking at Alberta, UBC, Calgary, and Regina, like this is going to be an outstanding year in CanWest football. There's a reason why between you and me, I think we've got 3 out of the 4 teams bought and paid for AUS TV, OUA TV, and CanWest TV. And I'm thinking we're going to be looking at a TVA subscription if that's what it means to watch. But man, this is going to be a hell of a year for USports football.
It truly is. And if those Saskatchewan Huskies are hoping to play host for a Vanier Cup, they're going to have to get through the OUA first. And we're going to kick off that OUA season with our week 1 preview pod that, again, wherever you're listening to this, just thank you for joining us along this journey, but is coming out at the time of this podcast is dropping tomorrow, Thursday, August 21st. And we are going to set up the first week of action in the OUA with some added fun little segments here and there projecting about who the top players are going to be across the OUA. So we cannot wait for that. We cannot wait for this USports season to kick off. So we'll be talking to you very soon right here at the 55.